Well, hey, welcome. Thanks for checking out my video. Today we're going to be covering another George Inness painting called Sunrise, which was made sometime circa 1892, I believe. And it's an original oil painting done by George Inness, the great George Inness, who has been an inspiration for a lot of artists just like me. So we are going to use a palette which consists of just a few colors: yellow ochre, sap green, burnt umber, crimson red, a little bit of lemon yellow, and ultramarine blue, and just a tiny bit of lamp black. We're painting on a small 7x5 inch panel that I made and sketched out a little painting a while back that really didn't work out the way I wanted it to. It was an original painting, and I sanded it down a bit, and we're just going to paint right over it. So we're getting started with a little mixture of our burnt umber and a tiny bit of lamp black mixed in, and we're just going to go ahead and put in the major shadow patterns in the painting. So whenever I cover a painting like this, one of the greats' original works, I'm not attempting to recreate it exactly. It's a period of exploration for me, trying to understand the thought process behind the approach of building the shapes, mixing the colors, developing the relationships between the shapes and the colors, and just maybe looking at certain objects that are common in our lives that I typically might paint in an original painting, but to some degree through the eyes of somebody else who's attained a very high level of skill and ability in the realm of painting. And we're just going to have a little fun. It'll go quick. And it's been a while since I've covered one of the greats. I tend to go back and look at a lot of George Inness's paintings. And while I marvel at his works from all different periods within his career, the precision and the accuracy and the skillfulness, how he went about rendering beautiful landscapes in his mid-career is just, it's kind of overwhelming. But I tend to be drawn to his paintings from later in his career, where he definitely went clearly into the realm of tonalism. And this is definitely a tonal type painting. Again, it was painted in roughly 1892. The original is oil on canvas. It's much larger. The original dimensions of this painting are almost 28 inches by 43 inches or so. And from what I understand, based upon what I've been able to source online, the original resides in the Brooklyn Museum in New York City, so maybe someday I'll have the opportunity to get there. The reference photo that I'm using that I flashed up on screen earlier is not the highest quality photo. I'm okay with that. I think if you were to look at the original, you would see a lot of details within the painting that are not obvious to the viewer upon initial viewing, the initial moments you view the painting. There's little hints and indications of some fencing and some other things that are pretty impressive, and as far as the subtle ways with which he brings about the rendering of the objects within the shadows and within the fields and all the different colors that are used to create those illusions. I'm going for more of a general sense. I'm not going to struggle trying to fit all that in my little 7x5. I'm just trying to attain some indication of the feeling and the nature of the overall painting in this small little panel that I'm painting on today. While I'm working on this, just bringing some of the basic shapes to bear here, I can't help but think and wonder, why I'm drawn to, the works of George Inness. I guess there's a number of reasons. I think mainly a lot of the landscapes that he painted I've actually lived amongst and within throughout my life. In his work life, it brought him to Medfield, Massachusetts, northeastern New Jersey, where I grew up, and upstate New York, particularly in the eastern portion of upstate New York along the Hudson River and that area, where I've spent a lot of time, whether it's been commuting for work or visiting family or what have you. And right now I live in the Poconos in northeastern Pennsylvania, and the landscape is there's more similarities than differences here as well. With the older mountains that you'll find in the rivers and the farmland and so on and so forth. So I think that's particularly probably the most important reason why I'm drawn to his work, because it has an element of the familiar, if you will. So it's kind of interesting. There's some insights that pop up when you paint over another painting and you see elements of the previous painting shining through in some of the areas that are not covered by the new application of paint. You see, you gain some insights. Like right now, I really like the way, even though it would be a rarity to see, a sky that looked like this. I like the way that cool grayish blue in the background is relating to, the darker clouds that are a mixture of yellow ochre and burnt umber, and also how it's working against the dark silhouette of that tree as well that's backlit. So we're not gonna, while tempting, we're not gonna leave that in. We're gonna cover it up completely and build our own rendition or tribute, if you will, to George Inness's painting called Sunrise. He's done a couple of paintings by that name throughout his 40-year career as a painter. This one, though, I've always been drawn to for a number of reasons, but one of which is I think it aligns well with actually what his intentions were, particularly later in his career. Trying to create a feeling of somewhat of a spiritual experience, not only for the viewer, but you get the sense that maybe it was also the case as he was creating this painting. So, at this point, we're just, taking our time trying to figure out what our next steps are. With oil painting, generally speaking, we tend to start with the darkest darks, the shadow patterns in the painting, and then we work our way up, to the lighter midtones and then eventually highlights. And so while I'm, kind of blurring some of the edges and softening some of the edges and taking some of the paint off, thinking about, what might the next steps be, and still admiring the interplay between those extreme lights and the darker areas of the painting right now, the extreme lights that are showing through as a result of the existing painting that was on this particular small panel. And, another element of oil painting is, generally speaking, it's really advantageous to work from thin layers of paint, desaturated, either with medium or, in this case, I use linseed oil. So perhaps a higher ratio of linseed oil to pigment at this point in time, and then work your way up to the thicker paints. Now, I've been doing a lot of plein air painting lately, and the tendency there is, because you have to work fast no matter what scale you're painting at, is to build up paints quite quickly, and oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, if you take a close look at paintings amongst plein air artists, you'll see the process lends to the application of thicker paint quite often. Generally speaking, with this style of painting in the tonal list movement. There was a lot of painting that was done primarily using maybe the knowledge that had been collected through years of plein air painting. But a lot of these paintings, from what I've read, were actually started and finished, or at least finished off within the studio. And in addition to that, oftentimes the effects were built using thin washes of paint, kind of an indirect fashion. So we're not going to replicate that perfectly here today, because we're going to try and finish this in one sitting. Whereas Inness probably would have worked on this painting over a series of painting sessions, perhaps maybe over a period of years, applying varnishes and scrumbling and so on and so forth to get the effect that he desired. Now, I have no evidence of this at all. I have no proof of this. This is merely speculation, but more almost like a brain fart, if you will. I know that, in learning about other artists like Monet, later in his career when he started to, see some issues with his vision, either due to cataracts or what have you. Some have suggested that had an impact on his style, and that happened to correspond with a time where a lot of his paintings had a very kind of abstract, blurred softness to them. I can't help but wonder if that sort of natural progression and decline in eyesight, in later years may have impacted the trend of George Inness and other artists of his time toward the tonalist style. It's, again, speculation. I've read nothing to suggest that would be the case. Have seen no evidence to suggest that maybe he suffered from any sort of decline in his quality of eyesight and so on and so forth. But, it's just an interesting thought. Could be the case, and, maybe it speaks to the life cycle of an artist, and the tendency for overall health to impact style and that sort of thing for people who are able to sustain a lengthy career. So I'm applying a couple of different tints here. I brought in some ultramarine blue, and I'm trying to be a little careful to not mix it too much with the yellow ochre that's in the sky. And I've also tinted it a little bit with the crimson as well to bring some kind of lavender or purple. And I'm just almost with going merely on instinct and feel, not really engaging my conscious mind here in the attempt to bring different colors, different pigments into the scene. One of the interesting things is, the more you read, the more you study great works, and the more you read kind of technical information on color mixing and painting and the application of color theory to things like painting shadows, you find that there's a lot of color in shadows, and you'll hear a lot of instructors talk about this as well. To the untrained eye, or to somebody who maybe is kind of going in their mind using some of the archetypal sort of visions that we tend to have in our mind of dark shadows, we tend to see it as one solid color, or devoid of color, an area devoid of color, when in reality there is a lot of color. So, great tonalist works like this one, I'll get nowhere near the level of quality, obviously, that George Inness was able to achieve in his work, his original work that I'm copying here. But you do see a ton of color, and a lot of it is high chroma, saturated, even though it's got a dark tone to it, which is kind of interesting. And if you really kind of sink in and just really examine real life examples of shadows in different environments, you'll see evidence of this everywhere once you start to look for it. So there is a little structure or barn in the right side of the original work, and I'm going to try and include that. In the background of the original work, Inness kept it very dark and kind of a blurred halo effect on the horizon, trying to indicate depth and the resonance of the sunlight setting over the horizon. I'm going to take a little bit of a different path. I'm going to apply some cool colors. I'm just curious to see how it impacts the overall image. One of the things that attracts me to the original painting is the golden hue, the dominance of that golden hue, which resonates in some of the highlights, subtle highlights in the landscape and even in the foreground. But I just want to get a sense for the impact of some purples and some blues and some cooler colors and what they might have there on the horizon. I'm wondering if it'll help enhance the depth or if it will detract from the overall painting, but we'll see. Again, this is a copy of George Inness's, a master copy of George Inness's painting called Sunrise, painted somewhere around 1892. His original painting was an oil painting on canvas. I'm using oil paints with linseed oil on a 7x5 wood panel that I made myself and also painted an original painting on that I'm covering up with this master copy today. So I would encourage you, those that are still listening, and I definitely appreciate you listening and watching this video, check out some of my other master copies that I've done, a lot of which were original George Inness paintings, but also others. You can just look for Study the Greats on my channel. You could search for Study the Greats and you'll see there's probably close to 15 or 20 so that I've done that are mixed in with some of the original paintings that I have on my channel. So yeah, I appreciate you checking out my video again. And if you've made it this far and you found anything valuable, if you found this entertaining, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel. Any growth that I'm able to gain through YouTube is the result of folks actually subscribing and liking and sharing my content, and definitely would appreciate that if you could help me out in that way. So right now, the bulk of the work is done with this painting. All the major shapes are in. I am now just playing with color, trying to bring some of the subtle qualities that are evident in the original painting to my master copy here. And I'm probably about halfway done. I suspect that total elapsed time that'll be required in order to get something close to what I want out of this master copy will take me somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes or so. For a painting of this size, that's typically about how long it will take. If I ever really want to do a fine master copy, it would require multiple sittings, even for a painting, a little painting like this, for a number of reasons. One, it would require, in order to get certain effects nailed down, it would require to allow the paint to dry on the original coats that are applied. So we can do some of those washes and some of the scrumbling and so on and so forth. The only way to do that is to allow the paint to dry and then paint over it with thin coats of paint. So for this particular video, we're just doing one sitting, and we're going to try and get as close as we can in one sitting. to at least a decent master copy. And again, the intention is not to make an exact photo replica of the original painting. It really is an adventurous exploration, into how I can go about creating similar effects, the interplay between the different shapes and the colors. And we'll try and get close so it's at least the likeness is recognizable, but we'll be perfectly happy with that. So I'm actually putting some highlights in, and normally I would hold off quite a ways before doing that, but with this particular scene, obviously there's an intention to create the indication that there's some water. What I do anticipate is that I will very likely have to come in over and destroy some of those edges and even some of the shapes that were created in and around where those highlights are. So I'm going to move away from that for a bit and start working on the little structure in the upper right hand corner. And we'll go ahead and start putting some cooler colors in. There aren't very many cooler colors in this painting other than the little bits that are out near the horizon there. And the barn here in the shadow areas of the original painting does kind of have a cooler hue, which is used, and it's very, very, very subtle. Now, in the higher quality photos, there's a lot more of this original painting. There's a lot more detail than the photo that I actually got a hold of to create my master copy. So you'll see an indication of a chimney in the original painting. You'll see an indication of the inset nature of the window and some of the awnings on the structure, and even some of the landscaping around the building. And you'll see a reflection of the sky in the window, so it'll have a nice warm reflection. And I anticipate that I probably won't get that level of detail for a number of reasons. The challenge related to doing so in this small scale, but also some of the time constraints here and the fact that I'm painting wet on wet, and there's a high likelihood the original painting was probably painted over a series of sittings after the original coats of paint have dried. I'm working my way through. I used a mixture of yellow ochre, lemon yellow, and white to create this kind of brighter sunlit areas in the sky. One of the tendencies that I have as a painter is I have a difficult time resisting the urge to expand the footprint of highlight areas. Looking back on the paintings that I've done of sunrises and sunsets and that sort of thing, I tend to, when it might be better for the effectiveness of the painting and the emotions that are evoked from the painting and the design of the painting and so forth, to leave those highlight areas much smaller and the footprint of those areas much smaller. I tend to expand them. I mean, who doesn't want more of a good thing? But sometimes too much of a good thing can be bad, and I'm resisting that urge in this painting, even though I have the original in front of me, or at least a copy of the original in front of me. I'm still tempted to put more of that really light golden hue into the painting when I know I shouldn't. So we're going to put some subtle indications of sky holes in the tree, and we're going to work on that tree shape for a little bit. The tree in the original painting again has a surprising amount of detail that's revealed when you look at it for a little bit. That you could actually see through the bottom of the tree canopy and see some indications of light reflecting off of the flat earth plane. I'm not going to get that level of detail in my painting, but if you look at the original George Inness painting, and if you expand the view, if it's a smaller copy, you can see right through the bottom of that tree canopy into the distance quite a ways. And I certainly could spend the time to try and add that, and I'm debating whether or not I should, but I think for the purposes of this master copy, I'm just going to leave it very vague, and maybe let the viewer decide what's going on there and what's not. There's also a couple of additional trees, smaller trees in the foreground in the original copy, and I'll probably leave those out. But what I will do is just make my way around the painting and try to create some indication of some other things going on in the sky. I'll darken some of those darker cloud shapes, and I'll work to soften some of the edges as well, but I'll also create some marks in the foreground and throughout the ground plane there, with the intent of creating more opportunity for the viewer to see things, and hopefully in a way where it feels like they're carefully rendered, but in reality I'm just creating very random marks throughout the painting. Right there, my attempt was, since the light is coming up from the horizon, toward the bottom of some of these darker cloud shapes, just trying to put some touches of lighter color. And then within the large highlight areas also, trying to create the indication of some clouds that maybe are diffusing some of the light off in the distance, closer to the horizon, so the darker shapes would appear much smaller in those instances as clouds do as they go off in the distance. So just playing with the horizon line now around that barn or farmhouse structure and around the tree. And I'm using certain words like explore and exploration and play, because that's really what this is. I've been thinking a lot about some of the similarities between creative endeavors like painting and athletics and work and what have you. These things that require these activities that are quite often complicated, requiring the use of multiple skill stacks. Things like hitting a baseball, or kicking a soccer ball, or running a race and track, or what have you. And this notion of being in the zone, during those activities, and how it actually be working from your subconscious. After you've attained a certain level of familiarity with the required skills within the multiple skill stacks that are involved in executing those things. It's quite like painting, drawing, and so forth. If you can use that, I guess the right side of your brain, if you will, and consciously drift into that subconscious area that would allow you to play at a high level without hesitation, generally will work to your advantage, and allows things to get done faster and more effectively, and with what appears to be a surprising level of ease and comfort. And a lot of folks will attribute that to talent, when in reality, it's, yes, there could be some talent involved, but it has more to do with preparation and practice and mindset. And there's just a lot of similarities there. Being a former athlete, and seeing my kids and their friends compete, you see them go in and out of these states. You also see it with artists. So there's a lot of similarity there. And that'll come up in a future book brief and book review that I'm pulling together for one of the classics, the all-time classics, called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. We're gonna pull that together within the coming weeks. So be sure to check it out if you're interested. If you've heard of that book or not, it's a wonderful book that has been used to help both artists and non-artists either learn to draw or improve their drawing ability. And it's helped a lot of folks, including folks that are experienced artists, improve, raise their level of play, if you will, or their ability to draw and render different scenes. So we're going to spotlight that on the channel here in the coming weeks. I hope you check it out. Putting some finishing touches in here, really just hoping to create the indication that maybe there's some tall grass and some sticks and stuff and weeds here in the foreground, and we're going to play around with that little barn structure in the upper right hand corner. One thing I do want to point out, in the bottom right hand side, from about halfway down, the light is reflecting off of some of the ridges that are created by the thicker paint that was left behind on the original painting that's underneath this master copy. So hopefully in some of the photos that I'm able to snap of this, maybe I'll share at the end of the video here, we'll be able to kind of highlight. It actually looks quite different. It's just the light reflecting off of those raised areas. There's not water there or highlights or anything like that. And again, that's in the bottom right hand corner of this panel. It's actually intended to be, and it actually is, quite dark in reality in that area, and there are no highlights. So just working my way around that tree trunk and around the horizon. Trying to break up some edges and get closer to nailing down the effect. And I'm realizing now that the barn structure is not quite where I want it to be. So we're going to use the back of the brush. Right now I'm running through the foreground, picking up some of that dark paint on the back of the brush handle. And I'm going to bring that up into the barn. We're going to use that to try and create some indication of some shadows. Obviously, it's a small panel, so a small structure off in the distance like this. There's going to be a lot of details that we want to hint towards, but we don't necessarily want to carefully render in a tight fashion. Just want to create the illusion that maybe we spend some time trying to do so. And we'll do that. We'll take another pass at that after just looking at it for a little bit here. An indication maybe of a window or an opening. And we'll pull some of that darkness, that dark gray up. And warm it up a little bit as well, because it is quite cool. We do want some light to be reflecting off of the top portion of that structure, but toward the bottom there will be a little bit of a shadow. And all throughout the painting you've seen me take some paint off using paper towels from time to time. That process continues all the way up to the end, sometimes where the paint might be too thick or certain shapes might be too edgy. We'll go ahead and fold the paper towel to a nice edge, and we'll use it with some precision and some care to soften some edges and break up some shapes that need to be broken up a little bit. We'll just make our way around the painting, taking some longer pauses from time to time, just to observe and see what's working and what's not, and what might need our attention. And right right now. I'm just focused on softening some of the shapes within the highlight area and near the highlight area, and bringing some indication of the light golden highlights in a much softer manner to other areas of the painting. And we're getting toward the end here. Again, this is a master copy, part of my long-term Study the Great series. We've covered other great artists like George Inness, Charles Warren Eaton, Blake Locke, and many, many others. So we would encourage you to search for Study the Greats on my channel. Appreciate you checking out my video. And if you've listened and watched for this long, appreciate you really sticking it out and watching the whole video and listening to me ramble on while I paint. If you found this interesting, enjoyable in any way, or useful, please subscribe to my channel. And if it makes sense, perhaps maybe if you think it would help anybody who's interested in painting or interested in learning more about George Inness and his work, feel free to share the video with them as well. And I hope you have a wonderful day and take good care. And hopefully we'll see you again sometime in the future. Thanks again for watching. Oh, and by the way, if interested, check out my website, www.thomasmichaelniemann.com. A lot of interesting content there. Subscribe to my blog if you wish. Some interesting insights and goings on shared about once a month, so I won't overwhelm you. But thanks again. Take good care.